Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello, and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and it seems with my microphone showing at the top of my screen. I don't know how. I keep adjusting it, and it keeps showing there. What is a host to do? So today on Trust and Estates Weekly, I'm going to be talking about making charitable donations as part of the administration of a probate. So I previously talked about charitable donations as part of estate planning. This is when the decedent is already dead, and either there is or is not, or both, there either is in the will specific bequests that the decedent wanted made, or maybe there isn't any, but for various reasons it seems like a good idea, or maybe both. Okay, so we're going to talk about those various circumstances. So now, as you know, because I've mentioned this many times on this show, probate law varies from state to state. Okay, so I practice primarily in California, although I've done work in other states, including Alabama, Virginia. It seems like there's one or two others that aren't immediately coming to mind. But in any event, I'm going to be talking specifically about California in terms of the details of this. But conceptually, I think that what I'm going to talk about will apply to all 50 states plus the various territories. So the first issue for any personal representative, and again, a personal representative is the executor or executrix appointed under the will, or it's an administrator appointed by the court. All of those together, any of those names all fall under the term the personal representative. So the personal representative, when making donations, is either acting under the will or is acting under a relevant part of the probate code in the case, in the state in which the probate is taking place. In California, that's probate code section 16,000 through 16,060. Okay, so if you want to look up the specifics, you can do that. Now, if the will specifically makes specific charitable bequests, so then once the will has been submitted for probate and the executor or administrator, the personal representative, has been appointed, so then the will has been accepted by the probate court, and now the personal representative has the authority to fulfill the terms of the will. So there's no additional court approval necessary to make specific charitable requests that are in that will. Okay, now there may or may not be the necessity to get court approval for charitable donations that the personal representative wants to make that are not specifically in the will. I'm going to talk more about that as the show progresses. But suffice it to say that if the personal representative makes charitable contributions that are not specifically in the will, that's one case, or makes charitable contributions that are in the will, but that create a situation where, for example, a secured creditor cannot get fully paid or paid at all, either one of those could lead to the personal representative being held personally liable by the heirs or the creditors. So, depending on the size, the scope, the context of the charitable contributions, okay, it may make sense for the personal representative to get court approval before making those contributions. Okay. And by the way, even when a will specifically says that the executor or administrator can do a specific thing, that does not prevent the personal representative from seeking a direction of the court, i.e., approval of a particular act. Okay. One way that personal representatives avoid personal liability is making sure before they take an action that the court approves of that action. And I'm going to talk about that, I think, a little bit farther down. Let me see. Let me just look at my notes here for a minute, make sure I'm going to cover it. Yeah, I'm going to talk about court approval and how that process works. You can see how it avoids personal liability on the part of the administrator. Okay, so you're the personal representative of an estate, okay, and you're wondering about charitable contributions. So the first thing to do, if you haven't done so already, is to read the will. So if there are specific charitable bequests in the will, so part of your administration should be seeing to it that those contributions are made. Now, that will typically happen at the time the assets of the estate are distributed. Okay. So typically, you go, you gather the assets, you figure out the debts. If assets have to be sold in order to be able to pay debts or whatever, that's done. Okay. And then the closing of the estate of the probate essentially entails making a petition to the court saying, I'm going to distribute the following funds to the following people or organizations. And having done that, the estate will close, essentially. Okay, it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but that's essentially how it works. And so there's no need to make a separate filing for charitable contributions. Certainly, if they're in the will, there's no reason to. But even if they're not in the will, if you're making it part of the overall plan for the final distribution, so the court is going to approve that in any event. Okay, and so you don't have to worry about getting prior approval. When you might want to get prior approval is when you're going to make early distributions for charitable contributions. Okay, so generally speaking, California law, the probate code, requires that charitable gifts not interfere with the payment of debts and expenses of the estate. So I did an episode, I think a few weeks ago, talking about priority of payments. So number one priority of payment is the costs for administrating the estate. That's the legal costs, the costs to the executor, the personal representative, whatever. So those costs get paid first. Next get paid secured debts and then unsecured debts, right? So there's a list. And if you can go back and watch that episode, and you can see there's 7 or 8, I think, items on this list of priorities. So if making a charitable contribution, let's say it's a very small estate. Okay, so right now I'm as a favor to my older sister Marla, she asked me to look into the administration of an estate in Las Vegas, Nevada, or in Nevada. And the way the personal representative was talking about it, my understanding was, well, there's quite a bit of money in there. But when I checked out the actual court documents, okay, the total value of the estate is under $75,000. It's a small estate, no matter how you cut it, right? And so, in an estate like that, where the costs of administration could easily be a third or even a half of the value of the estate, to make charitable donations before there's been a final accounting would probably be a big mistake, because they could hamper the estate's ability to pay the costs of administration and then any debts. Okay, so that's not to say if you have a large estate that it's okay to make charitable contributions willy-nilly, only that one of the things to be most careful about is, in making contributions, is the personal representative impeding the estate's ability to pay people and organizations that have a higher priority? Okay, so like I said a moment ago, if there's any question about whether donations should be made, the personal representative can seek instruction from the court. Now, if the personal representative ignores these issues and goes ahead and makes them, the court could invalidate the donations, forcing the personal representative to, in essence, claw them back from the organizations that received them. And if he can't, he could be held personally liable. Okay, so this is why it's so important to be careful about how you make charitable donations. Okay, so generally speaking, the California Probate Code requires that charitable donations be made after paying debts, administrative expenses, taxes, and debts. Okay, so if it's a very large estate that's subject to estate taxes, okay, so then to make charitable donations that would then preclude the estate from being able to pay the estate taxes, again, big mistake, right? Right, and nothing is sure but death and taxes, they say. Well, certainly, in the administration of an estate, that adage is absolutely true. The IRS is going to get its estate taxes, come hell or high water. So, if those priority of payments are, in essence, violated, so then there's likely to be a problem. Okay. Now, in California, there is no estate tax, so you don't have to worry about paying a California estate tax, but there are a few states that do have an estate tax on top of the federal estate tax, and they don't necessarily follow the estate tax exemption that federal tax law has. So right now it's about, I think, around $15 million, 14 or $15 million. If it's a married couple, it's going to be double that, $28 to $30 million. You can see that an estate that's going to be subject to federal estate taxes is pretty large, but that doesn't mean that a state estate tax law, necessarily has those huge exemptions. So it's something to examine very carefully before deciding, as a personal representative, before deciding whether you're going to make those kinds of charitable donations. Okay, let's take a break and I'll be right back. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213 264 4396 or visit magnumprops.com. Okay, this is Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're talking about making charitable donations when an estate is in probate, as distinguished from doing so or setting them up as part of the estate planning process. Okay, all right. So, talked about whether a will specifically sets up bequests to charitable organizations, or whether they're being considered on a discretionary basis by the personal representative, and the issues attendant to that, like that there is a priority of payments, and if giving the charitable contributions is going to impede the payment of administrative expenses or taxes or debts, that could be a problem. Okay, so having said that, there are tax considerations when making charitable contributions, essentially on behalf of an estate. And this is something that you should discuss with the accountant for the estate, and potentially the lawyer and the heirs, even before you might consider applying to the court for approval. So, so the Internal Revenue Code does permit, or does, I shouldn't say does, it's not that it permits or doesn't. The Internal Revenue Code has some benefits to an estate making charitable donations. Okay. Now, whether those donations are cash, property, stocks and bonds, it could be artwork, could be real estate. Okay. So, how all of that is going to work can get complex. Okay. It's more than just an individual making a donation, right? These days, with the standard exemption on income taxes so high, most of us don't itemize charitable contributions anymore. So we either give them because we want to, or we don't because we don't want to. Now, when we're talking about an estate, so there really isn't any exemption to speak of. And so the ability of charitable contributions to reduce tax liability can be significant. The estate tax, although it's graduated, it's essentially 40%, right? So it's high. It's higher than the individual than the top individual tax bracket, income tax bracket. So this is, again, something. Now, if there's specific bequests in the will and there's sufficient assets in the estate, so then whether they make tax sense or not is largely irrelevant. The decedent has directed that these contributions be made, and so that's really the end of it. But if as a personal representative you're considering discretionary charitable donations, so then this is something that needs to be planned out. This is not something to do on, as one of my friends says, real estate time, which is get it done tomorrow at the latest kind of thing. No, not at all. It's something to be carefully thought through, and something to to do in consultation with the various experts on taxes, etc., and potentially, again, even socialize with the heirs. Okay, so there, not only do the donations have to be made, but they have to be properly documented, and they have to be presented in, the various tax returns. Now, one of the things I think escapes people's attentions when it comes to taxes and probate is uh, that the estate, if it's large enough, as I mentioned before, will need to file an estate tax return. But if the estate is going to cross tax years, meaning it's around for more than one tax year, it may also need to file an income tax return. Okay, so I'm dealing with a large estate. It's a $50 million estate. And in last year, 2024, we filed an estate tax return. Actually, I take that back. We filed the estate tax return this year. We got an extension on it. But in addition to that, an income tax return had to be filed for the estate itself for 2024, and it'll have to be done again for 2025. So the estate exists as an entity. That's why you have to get a federal tax ID number for an estate. And if the estate is generating income, it has to pay taxes on that income. Okay, the IRS doesn't want to miss out on what it's entitled to. Okay. So again, if you're going to make charitable contributions, they need to be looked at as part of the broader broader tax planning that's being done for the estate, both on the estate tax side and potentially on the income tax side. All right. So this is how, by carefully planning, this is how, as the personal representative, you can ensure that the estate gets the maximum benefit out of making those contributions, and also show the heirs why it makes sense to do them in the way that you're suggesting. Okay, this follows closely on this issue of court approval. If charitable donations, maybe part of the plan is that the donations be made before the probate closes, right? And so in that case, depending on the context, you as the personal representative may seek court approval to make those essentially early charitable donations. If that's what you're doing, perhaps one of the justifications is that the estate will save considerable sums in taxes, and so this is why the donations are being made before the probate closes. Okay, so while here in California, probate code section 16,060 allows for charitable gifts that are not specified in the will, so it's still, the probate code still seeks to protect the heirs, and so they may require a court approval before they're made. Okay, so, and I mentioned this a little while ago, court approval protects the personal representative from potential personal liability. So the court approval process typically begins with the personal representative filing a petition with the probate court. Okay, and the petition may be for early distribution of assets to make charitable donations. Okay, that may be what the petition is for. Okay, there's lots of reasons why the personal representative may petition the court. On this particular topic, it would be a petition to make early distribution for charitable gifts. Okay, and in that petition, it will state, or need to state, why the personal representative thinks that this is a proper course of action. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it may be that the estate is going to save significant money on taxes. Okay. So especially if the donations are specific bequeaths in a will, okay, excuse me, it may benefit the estate by reducing tax liability to make them early, not waiting for the probate to close. Okay. And that may be a good justification for submitting this petition seeking court approval. Now, as part of the petition process, anyone who is an interested party, that will typically be the heirs, it could be creditors, there could be other interested parties, they're going to receive notice of that petition. Okay. Once they receive notice, they now have an opportunity to, number one, do nothing, in which case the court will do whatever it's going to do without any input from the interested party. Number two, the interested party can essentially file that they're in favor of the petition. Okay. Now, by the way, sometimes as part of preparing the petition, the lawyer for the personal representative will seek documents from various interested parties that demonstrate that they approve or concur with what the personal representative is seeking. Okay, so that could be part of the original petition in essence. But the flip side of that is that interested parties can object to the petition. So if there's a creditor who thinks that by making these charitable contributions early, okay, that it may impede the estate's ability to pay the debt, so they might object to the petition. Now, merely because someone objects to the petition, that doesn't mean that the court will automatically reject it. Okay, so the court is going to look at the various issues and make a decision. Okay, so one of the aspects, again, going back to this idea of a creditor, is if a creditor is objecting to a petition to make an early distribution for charitable gifts, if they're objecting to that because they think there won't be enough money to pay the debt, one of the ways of sort of anticipating and therefore, in essence, making that objection irrelevant is to show how making these distributions now will actually leave more funds later because of the reduction in tax liability in order to pay debts, okay, and show that indeed the estate will be able to pay the debts of the estate even after having made these charitable contributions, okay. Number one, that may forestall a creditor objecting. Number two, if a creditor does object, the court may look at that and essentially, disregard the objection as being irrelevant or untrue because the numbers are there in the petition showing that indeed the estate can afford to make these charitable donations, but also pay the debts. Okay. So then typically there will be a hearing on the petition, okay, where various interested parties can speak their case, and then the judge will make a decision. Sometimes the judge will decide right at the hearing. Sometimes the judge will take it under advisement and issue a decision later in the day or even some days later, okay? So there's no way to say in general whether a court would approve or reject such a petition. It's going to depend on the specifics of the situation, and just that just has to be figured out. Okay, so let's take another break. Probate and Trust TV, your curated source for the most useful and insightful content on estate planning and trust and probate administration, featuring standout professionals like Bill Gross, Paul Brabelet, James Cunningham, and yours truly. Whether you're a lawyer, accountant, real estate professional, or working on your own succession plan, this channel helps you quickly find the clearest, most practical content YouTube has to offer. Subscribe now to Probate and Trust TV. Spend more time learning, less time searching. Okay, and we're back again with Trust and Estates Weekly, talking about making charitable donations while an estate is in probate. So, following up on our discussion of when and how to make them, and how to make sure that the personal representative doesn't run afoul of priority of payments and such. So, there are different types of donations that can be made. The simplest, of course, is a cash donation, where the personal representative essentially sends a check to some sort of nonprofit organization, and that's kind of really it. Now, there will if we're talking about a donation that's being made to reduce tax liability in California, that would be only on I should say the estate tax liability, that'll only be on the federal side. On the income tax side, so if the estate has to file an income tax return, so that's going to be for both federal and state level in California. Okay, so in any event, documentation of the contribution is necessary. Obviously, a copy of the check should be kept, and 501c3 organizations, charitable organizations, are required to issue receipts, so that receipt should be retained as well. Okay, now, if some other type of donation is being made, maybe it's a donation of property, real estate, art, cars, horses, whatever it is, okay? So, first of all, in order to establish the amount of the donation, an appraisal may be required, a current appraisal. In other words, an appraisal as of the date of the donation may be required. Sometimes charities will bear the cost of making that appraisal since they're receiving the donation. It's oftentimes worthwhile for them to do that, and in fact, they may have an appraiser who, because it's being appraised for charitable gift purposes, gives them a lower fee than someone making the donation. Okay, so this is something to look into. California Probate Code 8800 indicates that such an appraisal may be necessary, and may be a part of the proper transfer of title. Okay, so there may need to be some kind of mechanism. Stocks and other securities, they may not require an appraisal per se, but they may require some kind of statement that shows their value as of the date of donation. Okay, and like any kind of appreciated asset, whether it's stocks, bonds, real estate, okay, there again may be some kind of greater benefit to the estate in donating it than there is in I'm sorry, there may be additional benefit in donating it. Okay, so one of the benefits of donating appreciated property is typically one gets a tax deduction for the appreciated amount, okay, without having to pay taxes on the gain, whether it's a short or a long-term capital gain. Okay, the same may be true for an estate, either on the estate tax side or the income tax side. But you can see right away that these are getting very complicated. And so this is why you need to get proper advice from an accountant, not just an accountant who knows just regular income taxes, but an accountant who routinely works with estates, knows estate tax law, knows estate income tax law, and can make sure that all of these things are being handled correctly. Okay, and So these are the kind of things, and this is why earlier I said that you really need to plan these out carefully. If there does need to be an appraisal, that probably is something you're going to want to get before you make the donation. Okay. And it can take some time if appraisers are busy. So you got to get all those things worked out. Okay. Finally, any sort of charitable donation needs to be documented. Okay, so detailed records need to be maintained as part of being able to make a proper final accounting at the time the personal representative seeks to close the probate. Okay, so again, this may mean a copy of the check, copy of the receipt from the charitable organization, copies of appraisals. Okay, it should all be put together in a nice little package. I know I keep all my records on computer as PDFs. Okay, but I was just putting together a package for somebody earlier this morning before the show. In this case, it wasn't for an estate; it was for a media project that a friend of mine asked me to help him with, and I'm putting everything all together very neatly, so when I email it off to the person receiving it, it's all just very clear. The record keeping is all very clear. So the same thing needs to be done in record keeping throughout the administration of an estate, but in particular, in this case, for making charitable donations. Okay, if there was a petition made to seek court approval for that charitable donation, and the petition was approved, that should be part of the records for that particular donation. Again, when I keep my records of court proceedings for an estate, I keep them divided up by the purpose of a particular court proceeding. So if it's a confirmation of sale of real estate, for example, there's a file for that. If there's the original nomination of me as the administrator, there's a separate file for that. If there are advances taken by the heirs, so I have a file for those advances. If there's a guardian ad litem appointed by the court on behalf of one of the heirs, there's a separate file for that. So there should be a separate file for each charitable donation, and it should include any court proceedings that were a part of making that charitable donation. Now, by the way, if the court does not approve a charitable donation, that should be kept as a record as well. Okay, and if, let's say, for some reason there's a bequest in the will for a particular charitable contribution, but the personal representative looks at it and says, wow, if I make this, I'm not going to be able to pay the debts of the estate. I'm not going to make that charitable donation. And let's say that the charity, okay, was pressuring the personal representative to give them what they view as their money, right? That's so often how people look at an estate. It's my money. The fact of the matter is, no, it's the estate's money. It's not your money until the estate distributes it to you. Okay. So in a case like, if I were faced with a case like that, I might file a petition with the court to deny a bequest in the will for the following reasons. Okay. And I would document that it's unlikely that there is sufficient assets in the estate to make such a contribution. Okay. And that will settle it sort of once and for all. Or I might file a petition for instruction, essentially getting the court's direction that I may not make that contribution until the final accounting is filed and the probate is closed. And then that sort of denial, or at least temporary denial, of my ability to make that charitable contribution, I would send a copy of the court's ruling to the charity to get them to back off. Okay, especially if it's a large amount of money and it's going to be a long time. The estate's going to be in probate for a long time, and I'm concerned that the charity is going to initiate some kind of legal proceeding against the estate. I may seek to preempt that and hold control of the matter by being the one to file a petition dealing with that particular issue. Okay, not saying I absolutely would, but just it would be something that I would certainly consider. In a case like that, again, it's important to keep a full record of all of the issues surrounding that matter. So if there were ever any question as to whether it were handled correctly, I, as the personal representative, would be able to show to a court, look, here's all the records. Here's why I did what I did. And, Your Honor, sanction the other side for dragging me into court and costing the estate or me personally legal fees and costs, because this was all handled appropriately. Okay. Another reason for keeping good documentation is so that the heirs understand what's going on. Okay. So in the final analysis, the estate is being administrated for the benefit of the heirs. Now, sometimes an estate turns out to be insolvent, and so the heirs are not going to get anything. Okay, and so that's why it's in some ways even more important to make sure that proper records are kept and that the heirs are kept informed. So again, as to, in essence, preempt they're trying to make a claim that the administrator, the personal representative, did something wrong and ought to be held personally liable. Okay, and then finally, keeping proper documentation. If the estate is subject to estate taxes, so almost for sure it's going to go through a level 1 audit, but that may not be the end of it. Okay, the estate may not pass the level 1 audit, and then it may start requesting, the IRS might start requesting additional documentation. And so you want to have that documentation available in order to sustain the case you're making from a tax perspective. Okay. And the same is true for an estate that's subject to income taxation. Okay. The IRS or the state taxing authority may want additional information as well. So these are the issues to consider when making charitable donations or considering making charitable donations on behalf of an estate in probate. And again, like with so many things, the personal representative, the executor, the administrator, they have administrative authority. But unless the administrator is also a lawyer, and for example, I am not, as you know, so it is sound administrative procedure to make sure that a lawyer is examining these various issues to ensure that the personal representative is complying with the law. Likewise, to have an accountant involved to make sure that not only are the numbers being handled correctly, but it's a second, and sometimes accountants, especially accountants who specialize in estates, they oftentimes know more about Internal Revenue Code issues and state tax code issues than a probate attorney does. Okay, so administrating a probate is a team sport, as I've mentioned before, and it's best handled in that way. Okay, so if you have any questions, thoughts, criticisms, etc., links to social media will be in the show notes after this episode posts on YouTube. So I encourage you to post them there. You can, if you have something specific, you can. My email address will be there as well. I haven't mentioned this for a while, but feel free to email me with your specific questions or private questions. However, I will not answer them unless they're within my realm of knowledge. So if they're a legal or a tax matter, I will be happy to refer you to a qualified professional, but I won't be answering that question directly. Okay, so that's the show for today. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. Wednesday at 10 a.m. is my show, People Making Money. Those times are Pacific time. And let me just see. Yes. And also this week on Thursday at 5 p.m. is my every other week show, Jiggers' Place, where we'll have a cocktail and a schmooze and talk about all the sort of non-financial related aspects of life. So I thank you for joining me today, especially my live viewers. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.